Thank you so much for coming a lot of big rounds today. So here is my welcome remarks. Well, good afternoon, distinguished guests, panelists, and participants. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the ISIS Thailand Public Forum this afternoon. Today our theme is Just Transitions in Southeast Asia, exploring the roles of China's trade and investment. We gather here at a crucial juncture where Southeast Asia's path towards sustainable and equitable development intersects with significant geopolitical dynamics. China's growing economic influence in the region through trades and investment is reshaping Southeast Asia in profound ways. As we explore the opportunities and challenges posed by Chinese investment in infrastructures, renewable energy, and sustainable development, we must also consider the broader geopolitical context. China's strategic interest in Southeast Asia not only drive economic growth, but also influence regional stability, environmental governance, and the balance of power. Today's discussion will examine how these geopolitical forces interact with the region's aspirations for a just and sustainable transition. We will explore how Southeast Asian nations can navigate these complex dynamics to secure investments that support equitable growth while safeguarding their sovereignty, environmental standards, and social fabric. Our panelists, experts in various fields, will touch upon cases and policy frameworks that highlight both the opportunities and risks associated with China's economic activities, emphasizing the need for inclusive and transparent policies that ensure fair labor practices, environmental protection, and regional cooperation. By the end of this session, I hope we will gain deeper insights into how Southeast Asia can balance the imperatives of sustainable development with the realities of geopolitical influence, ensuring that the transition towards a greener future is not only just, but also strategically sound. Last but not least, these kind of public activities would not be possible without the close cooperation between ISIS Thailand, led by my colleague, Dr. Pongpisut Butsabharat, and the Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law and Dialogue, led by Ms. Malinaut. The faculty greatly appreciates our partners' cooperation and support in this type of public outreach. This is how academia becomes relevant to the real world. By opening a safe space for frank discussion and debate, we enable society to become aware of the ongoing changes and dynamics around them. Ultimately, we hope our message will reach pertinent stakeholders and help shape and frame policy narratives that will lead to positive change in our society. Again, welcome to the ISIS Public Forum, and I look forward to the thought-provoking discussion ahead. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. As ISIS Thailand is organizing this forum in collaboration with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute and Dialogue Earth, I would like to invite Ms. Malin Out, the Director of Stockholm Office and China Program, Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law, to give a remark.
The Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law and Dialogue Earth are very happy to organize this public forum together with the Institute of Security and International Studies and the Faculty of Political Science at Chulalongkorn University. And it's wonderful to see such interest in joining the public forum today. So on behalf of RWI and Dialogue Earth, I'll just say a very few remarks. And I would like to thank in particular ISIS Director, Dr. Pongpisut, for this very fruitful collaboration we've been having with ISIS. The Raoul Wallenberg Institute is an independent academic institute established in Sweden, in Lund. We combine multidisciplinary human rights research with education, support, and outreach to contribute to a wider understanding and respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. And Dialogue Earth is an independent non-profit dedicated to producing exceptional environmental journalism and informed conversations on urgent climate and sustainability topics. Today's open panel will be followed by a closed-door workshop over the coming 2 days, which is the second in a series of 4 regional workshops that we are organizing around the world, addressing green and just energy transitions, with attention to China's growing role in the world. We organized the first workshop in Santiago, Chile, in April this year, and over the next 2 days, we'll organize the second workshop here in Bangkok, and then we have workshops coming up in Nairobi and in Stockholm next year. So I look forward very much to learning from our very prominent speakers at the public forum today. And with those very short remarks, I will hand back the word to our excellent moderator, Dr. Pacha Rapon. I've been practicing how to pronounce, and I heard you also been practicing how to pronounce my name. So I hope that was okay. Thank you so much.
Esteemed panel for today's discussion. First off, we would like to start off with Dr. Thitinan Pongsudhirak, Professor of International Relations and Senior Fellow at ISIS Thailand, Chulalongkorn University. Next off, we have Ms. Zhang Jingjing, I hope I got that right, Chairperson of the Mekong Legal Network and lecturer from the School of Law, University of Maryland. Next, we have Dr. Surya Deva, Professor from the Law School, Macquarie University, and UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Development. Afterwards, Ms. Gwen Robinson, Senior Fellow at the ISIS Thailand and Editor-at-Large at the Nikkei Asian Review. And lastly, Ms. Pianporn Deeds, Thailand and Myanmar Campaign Director from International Rivers. So let me end. Short introduction about myself, Pashrapon Panumwan. I'm a lecturer at the PGS and the MATES program here at the Faculty of Political Science, and I also run a company on sustainability technology, and we work a lot with disclosures. That's why I'm here today. Right. Please, may I invite Professor Thitinan to start us off.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The program I was given has me down as the third speaker. So I was hoping to be the third speaker and include and react to the first 2 speakers. Well, to lead off, I was trying to think about the basis and the premise of this conference. It's not our run-of-the-mill, usual public forum topic, just transitions. So I've done a little bit of homework, and I think that the idea is to engage China in the green transition in Southeast Asia. And I think that there's a lot, I think, between the lines here. There's a certain, 2 things I would just say in terms of what's missing, I think, in the title. First is the US. It's about China, it's actually about the US and US-China, and more than just US-China, so it's about geopolitics. And then, the green transition to me is geoeconomics. The green transition is geoeconomics, meaning that, this competition for resources, for critical minerals, for rare earths, for transitional critical minerals, is a race. And we're seeing the US pushing back very hard on against China on export controls. We saw the Inflation Reduction, CHIPS Act, and all of that, and there'll be more coming. So that's my first point, the geoeconomics of the green transition. Secondly, the transition itself in Southeast Asia. And I noticed that the paper that the conference outlined uses Southeast Asia and ASEAN interchangeably, but in fact they're different, they're distinct. I think the transition will be slower here in the region. It will not be as set, as designed, or as envisaged by certain countries. I mean, even some countries around Southeast Asia now are thinking about nuclear energy. So nuclear energy is back in the language in vogue because of this search for energy security. So on those 2 points, I will elaborate, and then I'll start off with China. China has been ahead of the curve. It's amazing that they saw this before the other major countries did. So since the early 2000s, I mean, even going back to 2006, China had an outlook on the climate action, the green transition, carbon neutrality, net zero objectives. And the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009 accelerated China's design and plans to put this into action. And by 2010s, 2020s, now 2024, they are ahead of the pack. They have a leading role in the green transition. They have invested substantial resources in Africa for a very long time. I mean, in Congo, this race for cobalt and copper and nickel, the Chinese saw it early on, and a bunch of minerals, but the minerals are not around here. Indonesia has some, Australia has some, but a lot of it in Africa, where China has made inroads, headways, through BRI projects, but also through other kinds of investments. So they saw very early on. And China has a toolkit that the US and other countries, many other countries, did not at that time, which is a very top-down industrial policy. So they can direct resources, government subsidy, private sector cooperation, and overall strategy to make this happen. The Chinese industrial policies have succeeded. They're now the leading green transition economy. And for Southeast Asia, I think this is important because Southeast Asia is the largest, collectively, trading partner of China. China has a technology that we will need, has resources, has the know-how, and for any kind of energy transition, we will need to rely on Chinese assistance, resources, capital, and all kinds of things from China. Now, this is not going to be straightforward. So if you look at the just transition literature, there's a certain mandate, certain premise, certain agenda from different countries. I looked at the UNCTAD had a kind of an outline on just transition and what it comprises, or the major pillars, the major principles. So if you read that whole document, you can see in Southeast Asia that we are mixed, first of all. Indonesia, I think, is more interested. Vietnam is a little bit more interested. But Laos and Cambodia, Brunei, even Thailand, certainly Myanmar, are much more, not skeptical, but hesitant to jump on this bandwagon and to incur the cost of a green transition. So for Southeast Asia, it's very mixed. And therefore, I think moving forward, what China will do, how to engage China in the green transition, carbon neutrality in the region, will have to have a mixed approach, meaning that not all economies in Southeast Asia will go at the same speed, participate in the same scope, scale. There was some thinking about using the RCEP as a vehicle, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And that, I think that is certainly one platform to promote technology transfer, green transition thinking and practices within the RCEP framework, because China is in the RCEP, all the ASEAN economies are in RCEP. ASEAN led the RCEP processes. But that also will have limitations, because RCEP is not really a first-class, a kind of a gold standard trade liberalization. So we will see how RCEP pans out, but there's a framework for it. We can use the RCEP up to a point. There's also the BRI, the Belt and Road projects are all over Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, Africa, all over the world. I mean, if you look at the Belt overland map, the roads maritime map, it goes all the way to East Africa, across all the way to Europe, the old Silk Road, the old maritime expeditions. But from what we've seen, and I myself have taken the train in Laos, from not all the way to Kunming, but took it part way, and it's a great train. I mean, the Chinese, they really know how to do the train system. But in terms of the green technology involved in the recipient BRI countries, I think it's more mixed. There's still some concerns that Chinese investments were not all that attuned to environmental protection, for example, labor standards, for example. And you look at the East Coast Railway in Malaysia, the Bandung Rail in Jakarta, the Jakarta-Bandung, and even the train system here that will come up in Thailand. The green concerns and incentives and objectives, I think, are still lacking from China. So for Southeast Asia, very mixed. Very mixed because of countries have different pace, different speed. You can't really think of it as an ASEAN. So I think it'll be more of a mixed bag or a la carte green transition, carbon neutrality practices and thinking in Southeast Asia. My other point, so my first point was just to talk about China broadly, about industrial policy. They've succeeded in being at the head of the curve, at the cutting edge of green transition, carbon neutrality. They have access to raw materials, critical minerals like no other country has, big headways into Africa and so on. Southeast Asia mixed speed, maybe variable geometry, different countries have different incentives. And my last point would be that the geopolitics of it, based on the geoeconomic drivers, the green transition, I mentioned in the outset that I see it as a kind of a geoeconomic competition now. China is ahead. The US is not going to let China stay ahead. So the US will do everything it can. And you can see, I remember the Republican National Convention when Donald Trump at one point, he said, drill, baby, drill. So that will tell you that the green transition will not be rapid under a Trump administration. I think that what happens in the US is a big question mark, who wins the election and what they do with their energy policy. But even if, whether Trump or Harris, they will do everything they can to stymie China's leading role in the energy transition, carbon neutrality, export controls, access to critical minerals, tariffs. I mean, Trump has promised to levy 10% on every country, but 60% on China. I don't think that will be implemented at face value, but the direction will be the same, that they will impose protectionist policies against China. So when you have this geoeconomic competition and drivers, peddling the geopolitical rivalry and confrontation, it will complicate the green transition and carbon neutrality, net zero goals, despite international agreements. So I just think that two things. I think it will be slower than we think, and some countries don't prioritize it highly. And then I think that there is geopolitical conflict from the geoeconomic competition on green transition will shift directions, I think will complicate the outcomes from China based on what China can do in the region. So it's not straightforward. When I saw the title and I did a bit of homework, I thought we would like to see that. We would like to see China doing its best, sharing its technology experience, protecting, promoting supply chains, resilience on critical minerals. But I think the geopolitical competition will undermine that, and then it will adversely affect how carbon neutrality is achieved, how long it will take in Southeast Asia. It will be very mixed. It will not be straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Thitinan. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Dang Dingting to give her presentation.
Okay, thank you, organizer, and thank you, dear audience. And I'm very thrilled to be here. And I want to introduce myself first. I'm a China-trained, China licensed lawyer. I've been working on China's environment issue within and outside China. So today I'm going to talk about my own experience, give you a glimpse of the China's Belt and Road Initiative and its impact on global environment governance. I started my work as a student volunteer many years ago, 25 years ago, and worked for China's first environment law clinic in Beijing, and became a professionalized environment lawyer within China, litigated against a lot of polluters and the Chinese government agencies, suing their wrongdoings and suing their pollution for communities. And now I'm working and leading a nonprofit organization based in the US called the Center for Transnational Environmental Accountability. We focus on China's foreign investment in Africa, basically along the Belt Road Initiative partner countries. And I have been working on this subject, Chinese overseas investment, for more than 10 years. And I started the work from 2014, just 1 year after China announced the Belt Road Initiative. So the subject of today is moving green BRI, Green Belt Road Initiative. Should be moving from promise to action. We have been seeing a lot of China issued green BRI policies, but still we're hearing a lot of issues associated with Chinese overseas investment. So I'll give you some more example and some detailed introduction of the Chinese policies and see how we can move from promises to action. I give you this full list, almost the full list, but it's not full. It's just a small portion of the hundreds of the normative documents and under the theme called the Green Belt Road Initiative. And starting on the official documents introduced Belt Road Initiative was issued in 2015. The Belt Road Initiative was announced by President Xi Jinping when he paid a visit in Central Asia in 2013, and the official documents was announced by the three Chinese central government agency, the NDRC, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of the Commerce in 2014. And the name is very long. It's called the Vision and the Proposed Action Outlined on Jointly Building Silk Roads on Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Roads. It's a long name. In short, it's a Belt Road Initiative. So that paved the foundation of the current the BRI. And then after that document issued, Chinese central government agencies also issued a series so-called Green Belt Road policies. And I consider it's, even though all the policies have been showing this political will to make Chinese overseas investment green and clean, it's more, my understanding is more like the top-down public diplomacy rather than the regulation with true enforcement power. And so you enlist this major policies, and you can see a lot of the policies named after, with the green, like a green credit guidance by the China Banking Regulatory Commission. That is earnest documents issued on this subject, and even before the BRI was announced in 2013. And the latest one was the opinions on promoting green development under the Belt Road Initiative issued by Chinese Central Government Agency, National Development Reform Commission, with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and MOFCOM 2 years ago in 2012. And we also have this renewed, the revised green finance guidance from the banking and the insurance industry, which is newly updated version of the 2012 version of the green credit guidance. So all those documents you see reflect the political will from the Chinese government, but the reality is very different. I will give you a little bit more example to show what the reality looks like in this region, Southeast Asia, and in Africa, where I spend much of my time investigating and tracking the Chinese overseas investment there. And besides the Chinese government issued guidance and policies, there are industry own guidance, like the banking industry also issued the BRI Green Investment Principle in 2019, and the Chinese business associations also issued their own guidance. All those guidance, I think, express their goodwill, and for short of the actions. Another top-down, we call it, I think BRI is very typical in Chinese, we call it top 顶层设计, top-down design, top design by the central Chinese government. It's very top-down approach. Another is our national planning process, and our first speaker introduced, yes, China has been very good at long-term planning. For our look at our 5-year economic development plan. Now we are under the 14 round, the 5-year plan, and under almost each subject, our economy, there are 5-year plans. And I specifically want to introduce this one is our our national mineral resource plan. The reason I want to introduce because it's very close related our just transition, or we could this so-called just transition. Is it just or is it clean, and can it reach our goal? The reason China won't make this plan is not not focus on the green transition, but for the national economic security and national defense security. Look at it's officially announced in 2016. And the reason China make national mineral resource plan is to secure China's own national economy security and national defense security. And under this strategic mineral category, you can find so-called transition minerals unlisted in this plan. China has 24 minerals list under this plan. And the two major, I think I want to discuss the minerals group. One is the nickels, which majority has been mined from Indonesia, and the rare earth elements and from Myanmar. I would say this. I want provide this cite these two reports. Which one is from the Global Witness, well-known international nonprofit organization, and on the investigation the environment and the human rights issue. And in 2 years ago, Global Witness published report reveal the consequences on negative impact of the rare earth mineral mining in Myanmar. And this year they issue an updated report and called Fueling the Future, Poisoning the Present, Myanmar's Rare Earth Boom. And it points out China, which controls near 90% of the global rare earth processing capacity, has outsourcing much of the extraction to Myanmar. And the terrible cost of the environment and the local community. Most of those rare earth elements from Myanmar originating to Kachin state on the border with China. Kachin has been seeing decades-long struggle between the ethnic community and the Myanmar military for the greater political autonomy. And the report indicate the new trade data, satellite image, and the community testimony reveal that the world depends on the remote corner of Myanmar has only deepened and has severe negative consequences for the people who are living there. And interview with local mine workers and community members said the impact on workers' health and on the environment and the local community continue to be devastating. And one of the community said there's no longer fishing in the waters, sleeping in the water can cause itches and infections, and when animals drink the water, they die. So those the consequences of the rare earth mining in Myanmar. Of course, the demand is from China, and China also exports the majority of the chemicals used for the rare earth elements mining process in Myanmar. 90% export the minerals, the chemicals from China to be used in that process. So that is one report and showing these consequences of the so-called transition, the just transition, what the consequences on the small remote area in Myanmar. The second report was produced by the Climate Rights International issue this year, and it revealed industry park, nickel mine and processing industry park, and owned by 3 Chinese companies in Indonesia, how the human rights and the environmental consequences has been, and it has been a threat the local community's traditional life, their environment, the access to clean and healthy environment. And the same situation I haven't been found. These 2 countries, I haven't been in Myanmar. I have been in Indonesia, but haven't been that the nickel mining site, but have been visiting the cobalt, copper, and lithium and the bauxite mining in Africa, run by Chinese company. The same issue, same pattern of the Chinese companies operation in those countries. And I have found the similarity between this region and in Africa in this critical mining sector. What I have found is the lack of the environment impact assessment and human rights due diligence requirement in China's outbound direct investment and foreign aid regulatory regime results in the environmental harm and human rights violation in the China financed investment and aid recipient countries. And similar violation, similar environmental consequences and human rights consequences can be found in Southeast Asia and can be found in Latin America and Africa as well. So that is the question for us, how we can move from the promises to action. We have been seeing China issue so many good documents, good normative policy, the documents and the policies, and the action is lacked. And for all those guidelines for short of the enforcement. And it's the time we move from the promise to action. And this is China's call to regulate and to update those policies to the laws with real enforcement power. And look at those promises made in this recent opinion on the promoting green development under the BRI. And you see those words, encourage, promote, and those are very soft words and won't cause any enforcement. And there's some good words like regulating complete stop on the coal-burning plant overseas. And those are very strong words. We need those strong actions be taken to encounter to the new laws and legislations. And so far in China, we don't have the overseas investment laws. We have our very sophisticated environment laws and the regulations, but unfortunately, our sophisticated, very good environmental laws and regulation cannot be used for the overseas investment. And China's, for example, the environmental impact assessment law cannot be used to the overseas investment. And Chinese, our central government agency, the Ministry of the Ecology and the Environment, does not have mandate to regulate and to screen the Chinese overseas investment on their environment and social impact. So those are things China can take action and can update on China's own promise and make it a real action and in a way of the legislation. This is what I'm calling for all of us to push the envelope. Also ask my home country government, China, to take a strong action to regulate and mitigate the Chinese overseas investment cost, environment, human rights impact. So I will end here.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite Professor Surya Deva to give us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I will try to speak in my personal capacity rather than in my UN special rapporteur capacity. But of course, in practice, it's very difficult to differentiate between the two because the work that I do in that role also informs my thinking, and my work as an academic also informs my thinking as the SR role. I was in Bangkok already for some other event. Some of you may know that states are negotiating a plastic pollution treaty. So there is a big meeting taking place in Bangkok. Today was the last day, so it was coinciding with this event, and I look forward to learning more today as well as next 2 days of these conversations, very important conversations, I believe. So in my remarks, I want to focus on 3 things. I want to talk about the context of the discussion we are having. Then I will address why China matters, because normally we don't have discussions around a particular theme and just focus on one country. That's not common, right? So why China matters, why are we doing it? And the way forward, some ideas that how can we move about those particular issues. Now let me start with the context. And I think I like the title, the use of word in particular, just transitions with a plural. Because sometimes people think of transition as just one singular and focusing on energy transition. So that is my first point I want to highlight, that we're talking about multiple parallel transitions that are needed. It's not just about energy. We need transition in terms of what we eat. Food transition is going to become very, very crucial. of course, transitions in terms of jobs, because technologies are impacting and will impact more in future. Who will be able to find a job? That is going to become a major challenge, whether it is because of automation, whether it's because of artificial intelligence, and jobs with only certain skills will be available. So I think that is going to be a major transition that is going to take place. So many people are likely to have a right to work, but no work available. And I think that is where the issue about universal social protection is going to become more and more relevant. I give a very simple example. I visited Vietnam in November last year as part of my country visit. I visited a mega factory of making coconut products. They peel about 300,000 coconuts every day in processing various products. And I talked to the owner of the factory, can I talk to some workers? And he said, we hardly have workers because 95% of the factory is automated. So that is the future for us. So not everyone is going to have the necessary skills to capture the jobs that will be needed in next 10 years, 20 years. So I think that is going to be a significant transition that we'll need. And infrastructure. So I think we are talking about these multiple, interconnected, intersecting transitions. And one overarching thread of these transitions is businesses. You cannot achieve any of these transitions without the role of the private sector. And I think in my assessment, the current business models are inherently problematic. They are not fit for the purpose, generally, for these transitions. So unless we change those business models, and I think these plastic bottles amplify that. Very simple example of that. Of course, I'm also having a plastic bottle. But the point that I'm trying to make is that our lives have become so entrenched in unsustainable ways that it is very difficult to decouple. We're talking about decoupling in a geopolitical sense, but I think decoupling to more sustainable way of life is going to be very difficult. Then I like the word just, because we're not talking about merely transitions, we're talking about just transitions. And how do we define just? Can be very contestable. For me, just entails fairness for everyone. And this everyone I will define very differently. I will define everyone to include beyond human beings. Because we talk about leave no one behind, and then we focus on human beings. But if we leave behind rivers and lakes and plants and animals, human beings cannot survive. So I think we should look at this question of just transitions in terms of what I will say multi-species justice. That is a very important consideration from my perspective. The other dimension which we often don't talk about enough is the rights of future generations. Of course, our rights are important and they matter. But we know for sure that someone else, we don't know who, is going to occupy this planet. Can we do things in a way that will undermine the ability or the rights of those future generations? So when I'm saying it's fair for everyone, I'm using it in a very different sense, going beyond human beings and talking about beyond the present generations. And of course, fairness presupposes respecting all human rights, because human rights which are internationally recognized, they provide a pathway to achieve fairness. Of course, we disagree what those human rights are, and human rights may come in conflict. All these challenges do exist, and I acknowledge those, but I think we need to follow that pathway to move forward. Now, as part of the context, let me also identify some of the challenges, and I would not mention geopolitical. I completely agree, geopolitical is definitely a key challenge, but I will skip it because it's already covered. Let me talk about some other challenges that have not been captured so far, in my view. Conflicts. The conflicts that we are seeing in the world, and you may think, there is hardly any in the Southeast Asia, so we don't need to worry about it. But the fact is that the world is witnessing the largest number of conflicts ever after the Second World War. And those conflicts have a serious implications in terms of cost of living. These have serious implications in terms of funds that were meant to protect the environment or human rights being diverted to fight conflicts or to defend against a war. And the diversion of resources, this was supposed to be for something else, is a significant implication in my view. So I think we should consider not merely geopolitical context, but the real conflicts that are taking place. The other thing is, of course, triple planetary crisis. So loss of biodiversity, climate change, environmental pollution, these are significant challenges. And I think this region, Southeast Asia, Mekong region and all this, they are significantly exposed to the risk of these triple planetary crises. Just to give you some numbers, the projected target is that the Southeast Asia generally should have 30% of the land protected, so that you don't do any activity in that 30% of the land. And the current numbers are 17%. So that goal has to be achieved by 2030, and I don't see that happening because it's likely that numbers may come down. Because as we grow, as we develop, there are more temptations to release that protection over the land rather than expanding the protection. So I think that is there. In terms of the hotspot, there are 36 in the world, 17 are in Asia, out of 36 in the world. So in terms of biodiversity, it's a significant issue that we see. The third context or challenge I want to highlight is sustainable development goals. So we have 17 of those, and if you look at the latest data released by the United Nations this year, only 15% of the targets are on track. So 85% targets are either stagnation or even regression. And that includes, worryingly, SDG 2, 3, 11, 14, 15, and 16. And some of these targets have a direct correlation with just transitions. Because let us say SDG 2 is about zero hunger. If people do not have food on the table every day, you can't sell them the idea of just transition. If the marine life is not safe, is not protected, we cannot really conceive of the idea of just transitions in a holistic sense. The next challenge I want to highlight is the financial gap and the debt burdens that countries are facing. We can look at any issue of challenge, whether it's plastic pollution or climate change or biodiversity loss. I will take climate change as an example. It is estimated that the world needs $100 to $150 billion per year. Not just one time. Every year we need $100 to $150 billion US dollars every year to deal with the climate crisis that we have. How much was committed last year in Dubai at COP28? Around $700 million, which is less than 1%. And mind it, this is merely a pledge. We do not have the actual money. And we are expecting that to happen every year. So just transition is costly business. So it requires resources. So who is going to mobilize those resources? Who is going to pay for it? The other related issue is about debt burdens. If you looked at the UNCTAD data, about 60 countries in the world, developing countries in particular all over the world, they are facing unprecedented level of public debt. I mean, US also has a public debt, but it is not facing that stress that is faced by some of the countries. So the numbers are that 3.3 billion people in the world live in countries who are spending more on their interest every year rather than on education and health. And some of these countries, when they want to borrow money, because just transitions need resources. So if a country would like to borrow money, the cost of borrowing for East Asian countries is around 5% plus interest rate. How much is it for Germany? Less than 1%. So if a German government would like to borrow the money from the same source, it will pay less than 1% interest rate. If an Asian country would like to borrow from the same fund, it has to pay 5% more interest rate. That has significant implications in terms of how we can achieve just transition. So these are not merely numbers. They have real consequences on the discussion that we're trying to have here. Two more challenges, and I will stop with the challenges and move on to China then. Civic space. All over the world, we are facing significant challenges in terms of democratic deficits and attacks against human rights defenders and environmental defenders. And it is very difficult to criticize governments. It is very difficult to challenge governments and have a critical dialogue. So I don't know how you can pull off an event like this, but it's not easy in my experience. And again, this region of the world is leading, worryingly, in terms of the attacks against human rights defenders and environmental defenders. So there's a website, Business and Human Resource Center. They document all the attacks all over the world. So 25% of the global attacks against human rights defenders are taking place in Southeast Asia. So we're talking about very limited space in terms of participation, and there's a serious risk that people face if they want to raise critical voices. And my last point is about the obsession of many countries with the idea of economic growth and GDP. So everything is seen from the lens of GDP. If the GDP is growing, we are developing. If GDP is not growing, we are not developing. And that means that cumulative growth is the focus and inequalities are rising. Oxfam does a report every year. I will not bore you with the data, but invite you to look at the Oxfam annual reports of inequalities. They document how serious the inequalities are growing. And they kept growing during the pandemic, and they continue to grow in the post-pandemic world. And that has, of course, serious implications in terms of what we're talking about here. Now, let me move on to why China. And I think there are potentially different explanations and justifications and logic, and Malin may answer from her perspective why China. But from my perspective, there are a number of variables why China matters. Not just on just transitions, but almost everything that we need to discuss in the world. Of course, we're talking about a country which has the economy of scale. That is definitely self-explanatory. But I would say China is unique. We have had superpowers in the past, and we still have superpowers. China is not the only player in the world, but China brings some uniqueness, which in my view, we have not seen before. We have not seen before because the number of Chinese people. So we're talking about other superpowers which are very small population. Whether we're talking about colonial powers or we're talking about US as a power. So we're talking about different numbers that we're talking about. But it's not merely about the numbers. Their political system, their geopolitical situation is very, very different and unique. China on paper may be a communist country, but they are a very sophisticated country and they adapt very fast. So it's not a typical communist USSR kind of a country. They have a very adaptable, agile, flexible system of doing things much faster than democracies can do. And the other difficulty I see is that there is not much space for autocorrection in the system. So let us say we have autocratic leaders or bad leaders in democracies as well all over the world. But there are processes in place that those leaders can be curtailed after X number of years. So they have periodic elections, or even if the elections are not considered fair, let us say what happened in a South Asia country recently. So there are processes in place where checks and balances work. They work because there is democracy within parties, or there are multiple political parties, or there's a free press, or there's civil society, or there are independent courts. Something is there. I struggle to find the checks and balances within China. And I struggle to find checks and balances outside of China over China. And because of that, China is a unique superpower, which we have not seen in the history, in my assessment, and the world order is not ready to deal with this new power. We have struggled in the past also. US as a power has done a lot of bad things historically, including in Asia, and we could not control that. So I'm not suggesting that we were able to control other superpowers in the past. No, we have failed consistently. But situation may be more gloomy in future. The second element I want to highlight is, like other superpowers, it's not merely about the economic might. China is not merely exporting goods. China is exporting ideas. China is a major exporter of governance frameworks and ideologies. It is shaping the new narrative on human rights and development. It is trying to influence what UN system should mean for the world. So because you are an exporter of those ideas, you are shaping the narratives, and of course every power would like to export ideas in a way to benefit its own core interests. There's nothing unique about that. But what I want to highlight here is that we should not see merely China as an economic power. No, it is much more than an economic power. It is influencing the governance in Asia, in the world, and of course that has an implication to what we're talking about here. Of course, China has significant trade and investment footprint, including in Southeast Asia. They have a number of trade agreements. They are part of RCEP, and they have trade agreements with Cambodia, for instance, and a couple of other countries in East Asia. But if you look at those agreements and all that, the focus is on investment and focus is on environment, which was also mentioned, the green bit of the BRI. But the focus is not on labor rights. The focus is not on human rights. So I think China definitely is more comfortable in talking about greening aspect of the just transition. But I don't think they feel comfortable with the blue aspect or the non-green aspects of just transitions, where we're talking about labor rights, civic participation, we're talking about human rights. So I think that is, again, a tension that I see, and it's not unique to China. Other countries also having that tension, but because we are focusing on China, so I think that's the risk I see here. Renewable energy, of course, is a key component of the just transition, and as rightly mentioned, China is definitely leading and much ahead of the peers. But the renewable energy I see is becoming increasingly irresponsible energy. And if the renewable energy is irresponsible energy, it's not really just transition, because it may involve conflict minerals. It may involve child labor. It may involve polluting the rivers. It may involve displacing indigenous peoples without their free, prior, and informed consent. So what I see at stake is there's a lot of irresponsible focus on renewable energy. And unless we address that, it will not be a just transition, because, and I think the nickel mining example that was given is, I would have given that, but I will skip it because it was already covered, is a good example of it. And there are many Chinese companies investing in nickel mining in Indonesia. So that is a case book study in terms of how it is going to work. I just want to mention two more factors why China matters and move on to some ideas, random thought in terms of way forward. China matters, and it links to my earlier point about export, because they have a particular idea of development. That idea of development is not shared by all other states. And they are saying it in terms of development-driven human rights. So they talk about a sequencing. I'm simplifying things. But basically they said, if we develop, and that means mostly economic development, human rights will be taken care of, environment will be taken care of. So what we need to do is economic development. That is the pathway to achieve rest of it. And of course, that is not normatively consistent in terms of international human rights standards, because the pathway to development should also be human rights based. You cannot put human rights at the back burner. and first develop and then bring in environment and human rights, because that is not going to be just transition. So I think that is definitely a major challenge. I need to click, okay. So what do? I go to the way forward. Do I, or I stop here? Way forward, but I will not expand. I will just quickly mention it, okay. The first thing I would suggest is that we need to engage China outside of China. I don't know whether we have China inside the room, I don't know. Because we can't talk about someone without that person being in the room, right? So I think I will encourage that we need to have those conversations, difficult conversations, and I do it in part of my role, but I think we should try to see how can we talk to those people. Secondly, we need to leverage better, in my view, multilateral processes that are taking place all over the world in different settings, whether this is Pact for the Future that is being adopted next month. So how for the Pact for the Future could be relevant in the context of just transitions, how the discussion about plastic pollution treaty could be relevant in the context of this, right? So we need to leverage those things. Third suggestion I have is that we need to come up with alternatives. It's easy to criticize China, but countries want options. So is West going to offer an alternative to China? Not merely in terms of talking about it, but in terms of giving money on the table. Give them the options. And then you can talk about this is a better option, this works better, right? So we need alternatives, not merely political alternatives, but we need alternatives on the table in terms of the money, in terms of resources, and make a case why this model of development and just transition is better than the being promoted by someone else. We need to enable participation. I see some youth in the room. That is my hope in the world. Children, youth, I think we need to ensure that they are the drivers of the agenda. And I think because we are failing as leaders, so I have no shame in admitting it. The current world is in a disaster because of the current leaders. So I think we need definitely more youth participation, better leadership going forward. We have not yet talked about intersectional impact, but intersectional impacts are very crucial. All of us are not the same human beings. Migrant workers, women, indigenous people, persons with disability, and so on and so forth, we are impacted differently. So just transition has to adopt an intersectional perspective to leave no one behind. And of course, my last point is about transformation. Often we are talking about tweaks, but in my view, the time for tweaks is over. If we want just transformation, I agree, the green transition is looking very slow. But what I'm saying is that even that slow or whatever is being proposed will not be enough. We need major transformation in terms of the economic order, in terms of the financial architecture, in terms of the business models, and in terms of our lifestyles, how we live. I will stop here. Thank you very much, and apologies that I went over time.
Thank you, Professor Surya. Don't worry about time. I think we still have enough time, and then we can also engage the audience. So without delaying further, can I invite Gwen Robinson to give her talk?
Oh, thank you very much, Kun Pachapon, and thank you all for coming today. As you know, I'm Gwen Robinson. I'm a senior fellow at ISIS, but I also have a couple of other hats that leads me to delve into this region in different roles, including as a editor and writer with Nikkei Asia, also with the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand, and various other roles. So I think I'm trying to draw together some perspectives that come largely from on-the-ground involvement and extensive travel in the region, particularly in Myanmar over the last 14 years. As you know, this panel is focusing on a topic called Just Transitions in Southeast Asia, and delving into the role of China's trade and investment. As I said, I'm going to focus on the region we're in and at the heart of the Mekong sub-region. And I think, as has been pointed out, in the majority of discussions about Chinese engagement and influence in the Mekong sub-region, the focus is invariably on China's massive top-down BRI projects, and also increasingly in recent years on the more unsavoury aspects of Chinese presence and activity. And I'm not saying, and I think this is becoming quite an issue about separating what is kind of official government sanctioned or party sanctioned and what is off-piste scam syndicates, criminal underworld. But often in China's case, because of its monolithic appearing structure, communist nature, it's all conflated, and we tend to, I think, often you get, for example, people refer to Beijing behind a lot of things. Often the scam centre syndicates can be completely, actually, as we saw recently, Beijing moved very strongly against some of those syndicates. So I think with the focus on China broadly in the region, and now the recent issues such as gambling centres, scam centres, human trafficking, we've got really a fairly negative view. The panel, as I said, wants us to examine how China's economic activities influence Southeast Asia's shift towards sustainable and equitable development. I think many would argue that this old big top-down approach, so typical of China's BRI projects, would go completely in the opposite direction. We're not talking about anything positive on those fronts in the old view. And there's still very much that old view which directs almost automatic suspicion and criticism of Chinese projects. And it's often justifiable. But I feel a lot of this old view does miss some of the vast and transformational changes in China's approach, which Dr. Titinan pointed out very effectively. And if you look at some of the figures, it is staggering. I've got a few myself. So much of that change has not gained the attention it might warrant, that China is now leading green transition in many respects in the region. We're sitting in Thailand, which has been flooded recently with Chinese EV, electric vehicle makers, so they are at the forefront of electric vehicle production in this region. Also, a traditional view is that China-sponsored development shows scant regard for environmental standards, almost a complete dismissal of local communities and what they need, and also on the broader development implications connected to large BRI projects. But as my colleague pointed out, China is actually the biggest funder of renewable energy projects in the Indo-Pacific region, and also, as we keenly know here, the top investor in energy products such as solar power and EV batteries. It dominates supply chains, as we have heard, for rare earth, amongst other things, including for other vital commodities, as we heard in Africa. And here in 4 countries of the Mekong region, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia and Vietnam, these countries rely on hydroelectricity produced along the Mekong River system for more than 50% of their electricity production. And China is the biggest financer of hydropower dams in the region. So my slides, sorry, I forgot all about those. How do I do this pointer? Thank you. Okay, thank you. So another familiar aspect of these kind of stark facts is the politics of being a major initiator and financer of such development. More than half of Chinese energy investments under the Belt and Road Initiative, amounting to more than $20 billion, were in the renewable sector in 2021-22. And this significant funding is critical to supporting the regional energy transition. But of course, amongst other criticisms, often justifiable, is accusations that Beijing has hidden strategies to leverage such financing for political influence and strategic advantage, including by deliberately creating financial and technological dependence on China. These allegations are reinforced by China's dominance of, as mentioned, renewable energy products, including solar panels, and control over supply chains for rare earth minerals and the processing capacity to produce them. For example, studies suggest China's global share in the key manufacturing stages of solar panels, which currently exceeds, I think, 80%, could be down to about 75%, could rise to more than 90 to 95% in coming years. In the more traditional space of hydroelectricity in the Mekong region, which I'm sure my colleague Pai Dietz will really focus on, so I'm going to try and limit that, China's upstream dams increasingly allow it to control water flows to downstream neighbours. Again, Thailand got a real taste of that a few years ago during a drought. So on the downstream side from China, more than 60 million people depend on the Mekong River for their livelihoods. And some also see China's control of these Mekong River water flows, particularly during these drought periods, as blatant political manipulation and even, a form of coercive pressure on downstream governments. So today in this panel, we're supposed to look at the opportunities and challenges presented by Chinese investments in green infrastructure, renewable energy, sustainable development. I'd just like to try and keep it tight and focus on a few cases that to me illustrate that we really should and need to look beyond just China per se to who or exactly what shapes these opportunities and challenges in this region. I think the fixation on China as quite an easy target to blame for a lot of ills tends to let regional governments, lawmakers and others off the hook. And I'd argue that it's often too easy, really, to blame China also for things like inequitable projects, debt traps, etc. But who are the governments and leaders who actually sign some of these agreements and agree to some of these projects? What happened with the Lao fast train? If you don't have to read much to know that there was, let's say, some very dubious government on the Lao side negotiations, and I think some people made quite a profit of something like that. And there's relatively low pushback against corrupt politicians or governments maybe also genuinely inadequate or not up to the job for agreeing or making those kind of agreements. In the Mekong sub-region, I think in particular, a huge part of the problem has been homegrown, autocratic governments, corrupt politicians and bureaucrats, passive or repressed local populations, or just plain opportunism on the part of regional governments themselves. This is the sort of thing that also got Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh and many others into these kind of holes with disastrous and costly projects. But here are a few examples of how, there are some examples rather of how some governments or even activist groups have really made a difference, stood up to China, and I think ultimately made a bit of difference to the behaviour and attitudes shaping how China now these days is approaching not just government-sponsored projects, but even really pushing back on Chinese companies. This one? I can do it. Oh, yeah. So first, though, I'd like to just give an example, stepping away from China for a moment, and to draw on a very memorable quote from a former Thai Prime Minister, Abhisit Vejjajiva, back in 2010, which is the year I arrived in Thailand, when Thai companies were moving to help develop road links and a special economic zone across the border in the pristine forested Dawei area of southern Myanmar. Media coverage in Thailand portrayed the Dawei development as a cheap and convenient solution to export dirty industries across the border. So Abhisit said in a weekly television address, defending or boosting the project and the idea that Thailand would put a lot of money into this, the road across the border and down to Dawei, that some industries are not suitable to be located in Thailand. And he said, this is why they decided to set up there in Dawei. And in subsequent hoo-ha about this, he mentioned petrochemicals and other polluting industries as prime candidates to move across the border and dump in this pristine forest and seaside over in Myanmar. Abhisit's comments followed negative publicity, by the way, in Thailand over industrial development along the eastern seaboard here, particularly the Maptaput industrial estate, which includes refineries and petrochemicals. And the issues were over water and soil contamination and heightened cancer risks amongst nearby residents that had been highlighted by environmental groups and others. So a road was built and land cleared, but subsequently events overtook Dawei, Thailand's own economic and political problems, including some turmoil, Myanmar's political problems, and also problems besetting lead developer Italthai Development saw the project falter. There were subsequent efforts also by the Myanmar government to try and get the Japanese interested, and the Japanese popped their head up and went down to Dawei and did a few studies, and I think they never mentioned it again. So I think possibly that they saw that this was not going to be an easy project. The road is still there, and some people have driven it before. I think it fell victim to a lot of the turmoil now in Myanmar. So I'd just like to turn to probably one of the biggest and potentially could be much bigger and is probably growing as we speak, projects, China-linked projects in Myanmar, the Chao Phu Special Economic Zone, Industrial Park, and plans for a deep water port, and China's great dream to build a railway across from Yunnan province right across Myanmar to the Chao Phu, which is on an island just off Western Rakhine State, which is now a huge battleground between the Arakan army and the junta, which it calls itself the State Administration Council. So China had long had a dream to have a route out of landlocked Yunnan for its goods straight into the Indian Ocean to bypass Malacca Straits. It managed to achieve in 2015 a twin pipeline that brought oil and gas across from Rakhine into Yunnan. But what it really wanted was this port development and at massive costs initially. To cut a very long story short, that had been agreed with previous military governments, and then a quasi-military government came in 2011 under Prime Minister Thein Sein. Finally, there was a tender that was agreed in 2015, and the costs overall were pretty close to $10 billion. I won't go into the details of how it breaks down, but they were separate components at separate stages. But needless to say, it was very big. The earlier plans and what China clearly had in mind was to add and add and add to this project. I heard figures of $40 billion, and behind it was CITIC, the government-backed developer, as well as a number of Myanmar companies and also some Myanmar military-related companies. Come 2015 and the Aung San Suu Kyi-led National League for Democracy government in 2015 moved to, let's just say, to reassess the project. They had help at that point from a US government-funded team of advisors. That project was renegotiated and back down to $1.3 billion, which is a massive cut, 90%. Clearly, China was not pleased, but it went along with it. It agreed to it. An agreement was signed. Suddenly, that project was vastly downsized, but it was agreed that that $1.3 billion would be just the first phase, and pending how well that part of it went, which was the special economic zone, things like the deep sea port and other elements, and later on the rail link would be assessed. So clearly China realised it didn't have much option. It agreed to it. It signed that deal. Now, not surprisingly, under the junta, they've just announced last December that there has been an addendum to that agreement, and many, many billions of dollars more will be spent on Chaopyu. So basically, I think they are back to probably previous agreements. However, the addendum's been kept quite secret, so we don't have the full details. But if they're adding several $1 billion, you can bet that there are strong elements of the previous program. I do just want to, have I got 5 minutes? 2 minutes, oh my God, 3? I should put it in context as well, that there was a surprise thing that happened around the time that Chaopyu was being negotiated, and that is, thank you, that was in 2015, before the NLD government came to power, and when, I'm sorry, it wasn't 2015, it was 2011, way before NLD. So 2011, when the government of Thein Sein came to power, he suddenly, in the first, I think in the 8th month after his appointment to the presidency, announced that his government would suspend a massive dam project in mid-zone in Kachin State, that $3.3 billion dam. That's just I think, an impression of what was going to look like. There was no consultation. The agreement had been with China Power Investment Corp. China was enraged. Beijing was enraged and shocked. We know that for sure, and subsequent talks with some Chinese officials showed that. Why did Thein Sein do that? He was a military guy. He'd been put in to look like a civilianized government. I think they were very anxious to establish reformist credentials. There was a lot of pushback on mid-zone. The area they were going to flood, some estimates were the size of Singapore, and a lot of people would be displaced. And plus, it was very close to a fault line, the Sagaing fault line, very vulnerable to earthquakes. I mean, it was, you could see why people were upset about it. So I think this established it made the world sit up and take notice that this government actually might be different from previous military governments. By the way, again, that is now being renegotiated, and I wouldn't be surprised to see mid-zone come back in. And the final thing that I would really like to mention, and I'm sure Pai is going to mention this, was I think the greatest example, one of the most outstanding examples in this region of pushback against China and actual triumph is Thailand's decision to abandon an agreement they made with China to allow China to blast away rocks and islets in the middle of the Mekong River on the border between Laos and Thailand, and that had been a huge issue for activists. I think Pai Dietz was one of the leading people with International Rivers on that, and when the Thai government abandoned that plan and announced it was all off, that was a huge moment, I think, for activists. So I'd just like to conclude by saying that I think thank you. Next one. That's the rocky parts. So ultimately, I think the point is that governments as well as companies of the region that contemplate, engagement with China should and must shoulder more responsibility to ensure that not just Chinese, but other investor countries as well. We're not just talking China. There are a lot of rapacious Korean companies, or there are other countries, Indian, Russian, But, really, I think more responsibility and blame could be laid at the door of some of the governments that make some of these inequitable deals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gwen. So that brings us to our last speaker, who will give us a very comprehensive case study that is much needed for this discussion, and then we can forward on to questioning. Can I invite Kun Pian Pondit?
Thank you so much, moderator, and good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone, and listening to all the panelists, I think I'm humbled to share my real life experience working directly with the communities in the Mekong River Basin and the Salaween River Basin. And given the topic of Chinese investment and trade and implication on just transition in the region, I'd like to share with you my humble experience on the case study of the Mekong River Basin. Now, this is how the Upper Mekong look like for the locals in the northern region of Thailand and as well as in the northeast Thailand. We have hills, we have tributaries that flow into the Mekong River, and of course in dry season, the majority of the water in the Mekong is from snowmelt from Himalayan plateau up in China. And in monsoon season, the monsoon rain will add more water in the river system. And this is how it looks like. We have wetlands, we have natural resource and ecosystem services from the Mekong River that inherit from generations. And repeating the same update map that Kun Gwen just shared with you already. 12 operational hydropower dams up there in Yunnan province of China. For over 25 years, people living in downstream experience drastic change of the ecosystem services, particularly the unusual water fluctuation, unseasonal water level, and unpredictable river change. For the local people, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 provinces, but this is about up to 70 million people living in downstream area. They understand exactly how the river would change in different season, in different ecosystem, and what can they get from those areas and from those seasons. The first case study I'd like to share with you is on the involvement of Chinese company, Sino-Hydro, that get the EPC contract from the Malaysian company, Mega First Corporation, that got the right to develop this dam on the 4,000 island area on southern Laos border with Cambodia. This Don Sohong Dam is just a small investment. It's just 260 megawatt hydroelectric dams built by this Chinese company, Sino-Hydro. But before the dam construction, we normally visit this family that they earn up to 1 million baht from just 2 weeks of harvesting, catching fish from the Mekong River in migratory season in early June to July. But after this dam is built, the Laotian government prohibit this kind of traditionally trapped fish method, and the disappearance of the fish method like this, as well as the ban of the other fishing activities surrounding the Don Sohong Dam area, because the reason is that this is to conserve fish and biodiversity while allowing the company to block the river, and there is no mitigation measure. And closer to my hometown in Chiang Rai province, Pak Bang Dam project is now going to be developed soon by China Tatang company together with Gulf Energy of Thailand. The project was there for over a decade, but that's off recently because of the involvement of Thai company. Just like Kun Gwen just said, it's not just to blame China or to blame Chinese investment, but also how about our own government? How about our own legal mechanism that can prevent such harmful investment to happen? Pak Bang Dam project is going to be built in northern Laos on the Mekong River mainstream, and to date, there is no transboundary impact assessment, while the power purchase agreement already signed between Thailand's IGAT and the company. According to the recent presentation by Pak Bang Power Company in the stakeholder consultation in Laos in June, the director of the company present that the transboundary impact assessment are being implemented by a Thai company. And as soon as they finish the transboundary impact assessment, the loan signing will happen and the construction will start right away. So this is what happened this very week, like 2 days ago in my hometown on the Mekong River in Chiang Rai province. The serious flood because of the rain during the 3 weeks non-stop rain in Chiang Rai province and northern region, plus the discharge from the upper Mekong dams in China. It makes most of the area in Chiang Rai in the Mekong basin along with the tributaries submerged like this. And people are talking about what if Pak Bang Dam is built, blocking the river in downstream area. So Chiang Rai, at least 3 districts, Vieng Can, Chiang Khong and Chiang San district will be between the Pak Bang Dam and 12 Chinese dams. So who will be responsible? What law we are going to use to mitigate or to find someone to be responsible for this case in the future? This is my own summary and my own read of this case studies that the key issue of challenge is that hydropower investment in the Mekong countries, I would say that is much driven by industrial sectors, not only from China, but also from Malaysia, from Thailand, and from Singapore, and from other countries. And those who gain highest benefits are the ones with private sectors, financiers, banks, while those who pay are the ecosystem services, and millions of people depending on the natural resources, and they have limited chance, limited capacity, limited opportunity to be able to engage in meaningful participation. This kind of riverbank garden destroyed because of the dam operation, because of the development that ignore the rights of those who depend on the river. And we are not talking about 1 or 2 families. This is according to, I think, 2010 study of the Mekong River Commission. It indicated that 2 million families growing riverbank garden like this. And now most of them lost their farmland and lost their income. How many minutes? Yeah, and last case study I'd like to share, as Kun Gwen already introduced, the Lanchang Mekong Navigation Channel Improvement Project. That the project is to clear the waterway from the southern, along the Mekong River from southern China all the way to Luang Prabang. This includes the up to 630 kilometer section of the river is to clear this area of the river into navigable canal. And there are different phases of development, and at the third phase is to canalize the Mekong River. No more mighty Mekong, just to be a calm, smooth canal for large-scale navigation. But the key involvement of Chinese company in this is the recent one was back in 2016 when the Thai cabinet had a resolution to allow survey and design study that implemented by Chinese company with a pretty memorable name, CCCC Second Harbor, the 4C Second Harbor, on this section of the river bottleneck. You know, because as Ajahn Suriya mentioned, because of the limited space for civic engagement in some countries, like in Laos, the study undertaken many years already. But in this section bordering Thailand and Laos in Chiang Rai province, this 97-kilometer section haven't been under survey and design study yet because of the stronger law that ensure public participation and more proper environmental studies in Thailand. So during that time, the civil society and local people not just protest, but of course we protest in some occasion, but we try to use the research, the knowledge, and try to engage not only with Chinese company or Chinese embassy, but also the Thai government, our own government and authorities to organize meetings, dialogues. We submit multiple letters to different bodies, including the National Human Rights Commission, the Ombudsman, the Parliament Committee on Lands and Natural Resources, on public participation, and of course we submit several letters to Chinese embassies. And at the end, after 2.5 years of intense campaigns, at the end the Thai cabinet issued a resolution which has been pretty surprise to us, that recognized the potential loss of cultural and local economy of this project, and they terminate the rapid blasting. But who knows, without the cabinet resolution, it's just a temporary law, if someone can call it. But what we need is the more permanent protection of the river system, as well as ensuring of the meaningful public participation. And these are 3 key case studies I'd like to share. And what I find missing in all the process of this kind of investment and trade, even with Chinese or Malaysian or other countries, that there is lack of mechanism to ensure those who paid are covered, and those who bear most of the cost are listened, and to be able to engage, to be able to sit on the same table. If you follow the Thai politics in the past 3 months, you will see that there is a picture at the golf course that the ex-Prime Minister Thaksin and the Minister of Interior, Kun Anutin, and the owner of Gulf Energy playing golf together with some of the key military Thai from the Ministry of Defense. And to us, as a taxpayer, as just normal people, ordinary people, we wonder if this is how the decision over investment, over important decision regarding public policy are being made, and how to and this is already in Thailand. This is the country where you find the most liberal, or the way that we can still organize such seminar like this. I can't imagine having a seminar like this in Vientiane or in Hanoi. Even in Thailand, we still have that kind of, I don't want to call it corrupt, but like less participatory decision-making process, so how to ensure it. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your experience, and looking forward for the next 2 days workshop. And this is my small piece to take to this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Kun Pianporn, for ending on that perfect note, because we're now going to open the floor for the attendants today. I'm sure you are dying with lots of good questions and points to engage in this dialogue. So without me mumbling on further, can you please, anyone have questions?
I'll go first. My question is particularly to Professor Deva on India. The question is, do you think India is neutral between the U.S. and China? And if so, how can India, you have any advice on how Thailand can stay neutral? Thank you.
I think India is not neutral. I think it is difficult to be neutral. And sometimes when you say you are neutral, you are taking sides by staying neutral. So I think it's a very complex situation. But I think what India is trying to do is it's trying to rise, but also trying to flirt with many countries at the same time and openly. Sometimes you flirt behind the curtain, and you don't disclose that you're having multiple affairs at the same time. So India is openly having multiple affairs at the same time and saying that is the new order. And we are going to protect our interests, and that means that we are going to strike this balance. That's my simple explanation. Of course, I don't want to speak for the Indian government. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think this has been a very informative presentation. I particularly enjoyed the discussion on critical minerals. My name is Robert Kibugi from the University of Nairobi in Kenya. And on the African continent, right now we're just getting down to policy on green minerals, which are critical for the transition. And other than at the continental level and at the African Development Bank, at country level, there is really not much going on, except that the rush for these green minerals is responsible for conflict in parts of the continent, as well as military coups, as you've seen in West Africa. And I wonder what kind of advice you would give, the things you would think that the continent needs to look out for. The second question relates to the contracting for Chinese investments. There are many things to be said about environmental law provisions, but the one that concerns me is public disclosure restrictions, that the contracts seem to have imbalanced provisions in terms of using Chinese-produced raw materials and labor, and problematically, there are annexes that are critical that governments seem unable to disclose publicly. We have that example in the Republic of Kenya concerning a railway line that cost north of $1 billion, but the disclosure only relates to rather useless main contract document, but the key annexures that show the obligations are unavailable. And I don't know whether you've experienced that in your research. What do you think would happen? Because the jurisdiction of the court is ousted. You can only go to arbitration under Chinese laws. That's the challenge. Thank you.
Regarding the critical minerals, I think it's a hot subject to discuss. I've been visiting a lot of the mining sites in Africa, include lithium mines in Zimbabwe, copper and cobalt in DRC, bauxite in Guinea and in Ghana as well. And I think the Africa need to make its own plan. Look at the EU made its own critical mineral act, and China has its own strategic mineral natural resource category. The US has its own. Africa need make your own. You need to voice out your demands. You are resource countries, and you provide the majority of those transition, which so-called just the mineral for the energy transition or green transition. And Africa need to voice out your own demands, and you have the bargaining power. The issue is the governance. Or no, the African need to increase your governance to bargain with investment countries, include China, US, and EU, and other countries. And that is, I think, is a major issue we have been seeing in Africa. You need to make your agenda and increase your bargaining power, and increase the rule of law, the level of the rule of law. Regarding the transparency of the Chinese contract with African nations, it depends on the country. In some country, we can use the local law, get the contract. Now, in Ghana, we did see the China-Ghana bilateral investment agreement. In Nairobi, I think in Kenya, you also have a really strong rule of law. And civil society are very actively to try to get those agreements with Chinese contractors, with Chinese government to disclose. It's not easy, of course. In China, what we see there are laws we can use, like the Open Government Information Regulation, which made in 2008. But the reality is there are some exceptions from the regulation, the national interest, commercial, confidential information are excluded from the disclosure process. And what we can do is look at which jurisdiction provides the legal base for us to use. No shortcut, unfortunately, and I think it depends on civil society, citizens' action, and depends on the local laws, what local laws looks like, what we can. We have to try. I saw some good examples showing the civil society organization, lawyers, citizens, they can use their law, take actions, and get those the information vital for their the campaign work. There's no shortcut we can use. And in China, I think we do have some laws can use, but the Chinese court, we cannot consider using that path. Because we all know the political environment in China doesn't leave much civic space for us to act.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Dee Lee. I'm a founder and the director of INO. We are a human rights organization based in China and also the other in India and ASEAN countries. Predominantly working on human rights issues for the supply chain, fishery, mining sites as well. So I'm going to echo our prestige speakers and also my 2 cents of the topics. So to Professor Tintinan, you speaking, you mentioned about how Trump is trying to compete with the let's say China over the green economy. But in my memory of talking, let's say engaging with the local embassies and consulate for the United States during the Biden administration, and also try to understand the narratives of Kamala Harris. In her acceptance speech, she never mentioned about any competition with China over the green economy. Actually, on the ground, there are many collaboration between China and U.S. To build something to have a better Earth for the future. So that's the political nonsense before the election. But on the ground, there are still many partnerships between the Biden administration and China in terms of the green economy. But Harris mentioned a lot of AI and space competition with China. That's the reality. To echo Ms. Jingjing Zhang, I totally agree with your narratives about the empty promises, including it's not just about the ASEAN region. Inside China, environmental and social litigation against the just transition is getting harder and harder. There are fewer and fewer cases that's been listed as successful cases in the academia sector or also the practitioner sector. It's getting harder and harder. So it might lead to a way that the promise is getting emptier and emptier. And to Dr. Soya, and I watch a lot of your speech and also your speaking in the UNDP. I totally agree with the your point of why China matters in the just transitions. One thing I slightly disagree with your saying is that when you say about China, sometimes we have to sit down and patiently to talk about the definition of China, because China has so many other definitions. It's getting more and more diverse. Is it the ruling party? Is it the government? Is it a state-owned company? Is it a private company? Or one thing that I'm so proud of, where I'm from, which is civic space, civic NGO organization, or civic society organization or NGO. So we've been doing a lot in the last 30 years to help with the environmental and human rights improvement in the supply chain, and we're so proud of it. But when you have to mention the other stuff like Uyghur issue, that's totally another chapter of the business. To Pai, you're my hero. You've been doing a lot on the Mekong River, and for one thing, I'm so sure that we're trying to invite you to our seminar 2 years ago, but unfortunately, we'll talk about it later when we have time. To Gwen, I totally agree with that you're saying about the blame game. If it is a blame game with China, we have to draw the other players to play around. Otherwise, the big dude in the game wouldn't be happy about, I am the only one to be blamed. So this strategy is one of the things that I totally agree with. And we've been doing that for multiple sessions for the kind of a non-judicial negotiation. Sorry about that. Last, I wanted to mention 3 different things that has not been mentioned over the topics. One is that who speaks the just transition mainly now in China? You can say it about academia, you can say it about the government, but one of the things that I'm also very shocked about at the moment inside of China, when the people talk about the just transition is the state apparatus who control the state stabilization machines, and meaning that one, this is where the money is, and second, it has been elevated to a level of the state stabilization and country safety. And the third thing is, there are still many players for the just transitions, but the rule of the game is totally different from 2 years ago. And the second thing would be the stakeholder engagement should be the very important thing for us to play out. The third thing is there are many other new economy we should focus on the just transition for the Chinese role in China, including gaming, including the consumer platform, including Temu Shein. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Do we have comments? Anything to add? Right.
Thank you. My name is Kasit Pirom, a fellow at ISIS. I have a couple of other hats. One of them is the ASEAN Parliamentarian for Human Rights. First is to thank all the panelists. I do agree with the general trend of the thinking and observation and so on. When I first read the title of this conference, I was asking myself why the hell is a Swedish agency want to represent or to become the spokesperson of China, because the title was not so clear whether we're going to be in praise or in criticism of China, because all along for the past decade and a half, with the revenge for the 1 century of humiliation and assertive China, I have not been a fan club of the Chinese leadership. I have been very critical, openly, many times and so on. And of late, many years now, I have not been invited to the Chinese embassy in Bangkok. So that's the end result of it. But my point that I would like to add to the panel list is that China is now operating from a one-party position of wanting to dominate and control the Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific, or the world. We have to always understand that why they come to Asia-Pacific, they go to Africa, to Latin America, I think with one objective in mind: dominance as much as possible. And second, to get the commodities and the raw materials from the extractive industries and so on to feed the Chinese industrialization process. So one has to understand that dominance thinking and a bit of a self-centered wishes and so on. And in that sense, the question of just fairness is not in the equation or in the thinking of the Chinese leadership. We cannot do much about transitional justice in our dealings with China. So that's the first point. But I do not want to continue blaming the Chinese leadership. I would like to blame the present ASEAN leadership, and within that context, the lower Mekong countries' leadership for not having the guts and the determination to stand up to the Chinese pressure and misbehavior in the upper Mekong, in the South China Sea, along the Thai-Myanmar border, China, Burma, Laos, Burma border, with the influx of Chinese mafias, robbers and thieves, in spite of the very totalitarian nature of the communist regime in China. And I have been wondering why they have been allowing their citizens to destroy and undermine the neighboring countries. Is it part of the foreign policy direction? Is it deliberate? Export thieves to the neighboring countries for control and so on. And it's something that we could have a further discussion in the near future. But again, I think the onus is on the ASEAN and the Mekong leadership. No guts and determination. What can we do? What would be your ideas on how to beef up the ASEAN or the Mekong leadership? Or we already give up that the Laotian Communist Party is under the complete control of Beijing, the Hun Sen, the Hun family similarly, and maybe half of the Thai conservative establishment and so on. Or even the elected Indonesian leadership, I think it's known now that they have been receiving a lot of money from China and so on. So what can we do to push the ASEAN leadership to do something about the common good of the ASEAN? Then the second point that I would like to observe is that throughout my diplomatic career, since I was very young and so on, the name of ODA, OECF, Exim Bank, USAID, and so on were very much part of my life, inclusive of the World Bank, Asia Development Bank. More or less, these are the institutions and mechanisms forthcoming from the G7 that did help us to withstand the expansion of communism. And we have become big and small tigers and all of that with the Western world support under the leadership of the United States. Then suddenly in the past 10, 15 years, it seems that the G7 have altogether given up and allowed the BRI, AIIB, the BRICS, and the New Development Bank to be on the forefront. What happened to the leaderships of the G7? Have they given up altogether? Or they have been too much busy with the color politics, racial politics, and so on? Could we help one another to say, then what can we do to push not only the ASEAN leadership, but also the G7 leadership, that you are not putting, or you have not been putting up the fight, and it's about time that they stand up and offer to the developing world, to the global South, what the Chinese for the past 10 years have been successfully been doing, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Claudia Ituarte Lima. I'm senior researcher at the Raoul Wallenberg Institute on Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. So my question is, considering that 4 Southeast Asian countries explicitly recognize the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment with different wording, and that no country voted against the 2022 UN resolution on the right to a healthy environment, China abstained, but not opposed. To what extent do you think using this right not only to react, but to prevent the negative impacts of the green transitions can be done? And I'm interested in this question mainly for two reasons. The first, at UN General Assemblies, Human Rights Councils, academics, we have remained a very abstract, and we continue to debate at that level. And what I consider that this panel is bringing, it's very much empirical evidence, case studies, something that we need to learn much more. So that's why this panel has a lot to offer in that. And the second reason why I'm interested in is also a deeper understanding of who environmental human rights defenders are and what do they do. Often in the imaginary of people, environmental human rights defenders are out in the streets, which of course it's a right to have peaceful assembly and freedom of expression and opinion. Yet, we think relatively less of those lawyers, community paralegals who are using the law, probably silently, to enact change. And in those spaces where there's limited civic space, it may be relatively the few spaces where they can act. So very keen to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Does any of the panelists want to respond to that?
Okay, a couple of very rich input coming from floor. Who is China? Definitely, I think that's, it's not a monolithic country. I mean, so of course, we are simplifying things, but I think we need to engage with everything you mentioned. The government, the party, the state-owned enterprises, the private companies, and academia everywhere. So I think the idea is to how do we influence? Because China also changes. It's not that China is not changing. China is changing in response to the criticism that it receives. So my view is that we should not lose hope on China. China is a complex country, but I think we should try to influence China as much as we can. The relevance of the right to a clean, healthy, sustainable environment, I think it can be relevant, but I think we should also keep in mind that the international recognition of the right does not give it much value in terms of litigation. So the key issue is that do we already have that right under the constitution or the local legislation? And if that is the case, it is already being used in many jurisdictions to fight against the projects in a preventive way as well. But perhaps what we need is some sharing of good practices. Like how could a case from India inspire someone in Thailand or Vietnam or Laos and vice versa? So I think I would suggest, I don't know if RWI would like to take the leadership, we need a community of practice in terms of those innovative approaches, that how it has been done. And the next question is going to be, how do you apply that innovation to the local conditions? Because every country is different. The court system is different. The civic space amplitude is different. For instance, when you file a public interest litigation case in China, you try to frame it not as a public interest. You try to frame it as a private interest. So the issue is of public interest, but you frame it as a private interest. But this is completely different in India. Even if it is a private interest case, you frame it as a public interest. So I think we need those expertise so that we can localize those experiences, in my view. And I'm not sure if I got your second question, but lawyers, paralegals are part of environmental defenders. I mean, definition is very broad. I'm sure my colleagues will add something. Thank you.
I can talk about the right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. In China, the environmental rights has been talked for many years, but surprisingly, in 2022, China abstained that the UN resolution. And it indicates China is not willing to accept the human rights, the current definition, the commonly accepted international defined human rights China has its own definition of what rights should be and human rights should be. So that is one. I also quite surprised by China's absent vote. I also want to talk about the host country, Chinese investment recipient countries' own responsibility. And the same Chinese company, its environment and human rights performance can be varied based on where it's located. And look at the large state-owned Chinese company, like oil company CNPC and other Chinese state-owned company. They have an investment in Australia, Canada, in Europe, as well as in Africa and in this region. And their performance, their subsidiaries perform very differently because the operation environment, the legal requirement in those countries are very different. So that's the reason I think increase the bar from the Chinese investment recipient country is also important to identify the solution, how to ensure that those harmful projects can be blocked at the very beginning, and increase the governance, rule of law in Southeast Asia, Latin America. I think Latin America now provides a good example to show how it can improve. Like the ISCASU agreement provides very strong legal instrument, which will make Chinese company to comply with. And that is a good example to show what we can do, what we can take action to ensure those harmful projects to be blocked at the very beginning.
Okay, can I get the gentleman back?
Hello, everyone. I'm Francisco Ordines. I come from Chile. I'm a scholar working on China-Latin American relations, and a lot of what you exposed today resonates a lot on what we see and study in Latin America, which is quite interesting to me. So I wanted to ask to the table on the demand side in terms of trying to understand differences between Thailand and neighboring countries. A lot of what we see in South America on how Chinese companies behave usually have to do with three issues: on the existence and characteristics of open bidding systems. So the first question would be, those projects that you described were directly awarded, there were open biddings for those projects in the Mekong River. How are due diligences in this country, and which role play large law firms? And third, someone mentioned this, but were there alternatives for alternative companies or from different nationalities to provide these economic goods? This is something key, for example, in how successful Chinese companies are in Chile versus Argentina, for example, whether Western or non-Chinese companies are also willing to bid in certain projects. So for me to learn, I would like to understand those 3 points, how they played a role in these large infrastructure projects in this country.
I can respond this in short way. First of all, the hydropower development on the Mekong is not solely for producing hydropower or electricity. You know, in Thailand, we have been oversupplied for the past 5 years. In some months, we have as much as 60% oversupplied, meaning that, but given the power purchase agreement with the take or pay kind of contract, meaning that we have to pay constantly during the 29 years period of the agreement with hydropower station, for example. And for the past 3 years, Thai electricity users felt the increasing expensive electricity bills, and everybody are feeling that we are victims of those hydropower developments on the Mekong, particularly in Laos, because they are so expensive, not needed, for private sector, for financiers, exploiting our common resources and shared resource, which is the Mekong River. And the way it put, the way that government label it as a clean and renewable is being debated strongly and amongst within the country. Lots of civil society groups as well as consumer groups criticize that this is not renewable, this is not just, and it excludes people from being able to participate in the planning and in decision. And there are alternatives available, but in Thailand, the way that electricity supply has been centralized, there is less chance for small-scale or decentralized energy production being able to be allowed. And with more growing role from Singapore and Malaysia, the ASEAN transmission line connectivity makes it worse for us defending for the Mekong River resources. And last thing I like to share is also about what Ajahn Surya mentioned about China starting to respond to criticism. Just 3 days ago, the Thai Mekong River Commission Secretariat sent a letter to China asking China to release less water so that it will ease the flood crisis in northern Thailand. And just this morning, the Chinese embassy in Bangkok just have a press release saying that it already decreased the water discharge from Jinghong hydropower station 60% compared to last year. But if we look at the information, the discharge, actually the discharge from the Jinghong hydropower station has been increased, but it decreased if we compare to last year. So I think what is important is that, yeah, of course we appreciate the way that Chinese embassy respond to the request from downstream country, but how we can discuss in open manner with using information, using data, because the numbers won't lie, right? We're looking at the statistic and we can explain. And we really hope that with the new government, Thaksin's daughter, apart from cooking for flood-affected people, we like her to stand and talk to China because she's young and she's quite pretty. I think if Thailand is a country of the strongest country in the region, if we believe that we should talk to them in the polite way, in the constructive way, we should be able to make a first step talking to them, and hopefully they can open the door and better than sitting like this and feeling that we cannot do anything with China at all. Maybe Ajahn.
She's also a graduate of this faculty. I don't know if that will help or not. I'll just say 2 or 3 things. About Latin America, South America, and Africa. I think that there are lessons to be learned from Asia, dealing with China about leverage, bargaining. And I wonder if the Chinese wherewithal in green transition, green technology will be leverage for Chinese geopolitical influence. So I think for Africa and Latin America, South America, you have a kind of a lessons you can learn from, and it's still an early stage, earlier stage where you can kind of adjust and adapt, and competition very, very important. I think here you asked about whether the bidding was transparent and competitive. Sometimes, but sometimes also, the Chinese, they have state-owned enterprises. So procurement regulation, for example, is not so fair. And it's harder to deal with state-owned enterprises. They have a lot of resources. I'll just say earlier about the Trump question that I think was mischaracterized. When Trump said drill, baby, drill, he meant gas and oil and gas. So it's not that he's going to compete with China on the green transition. On the contrary, he will focus on the non-green, back to fossil fuels and carbon, and I think that will slow the green transition significantly. This is a period of rulemaking, which means that whether it be green technology, green transition, AI, and so on, this is a stage where rules are being made. And what you mentioned, I think, calls for cooperation between the US and China. If the US and China can cooperate and make rules and collaborate, coordinate, that would be the best outcome. But what we're seeing is the opposite. They go in different ways. That's why we have this so-called de-risking, decoupling, and so on. So it's very alarming. The panel, I thought, it's interesting that what we heard about the Mekong upstream dams and the premise of this session is about the just transitions in terms of green technology, green transition, climate action, being carbon neutral, net zero emissions. That's the aim of I think the conversation and also the premise for this panel. But it turns out that combined in collection, the panel actually is very concerned about Chinese behavior. And there's a kind of a contradiction bordering on a paradox about China. On the one hand, it, as we've heard, has incurred environmental degradation in the Mekong mainland region, right? With upstream dams, rock blasting, mid-zone dam, a lot of environmental degradation. On the other hand, China has a lot to offer in terms of green technology. It has a dominant position in the green technology supply chains. It's the biggest exporter of solar panels, wind turbines, EVs, lithium-ion batteries. So on the one hand, it has a lot to offer, and a lot of countries can benefit from Chinese technology, know-how, and so on. But on the other hand, it also has been the cause of a lot of environmental degradation around here. So I think that's why I would kind of think that maybe moving forward, I wonder if this green technology that China has invested in ahead of the others, its peer group, is going to be used as a leverage for kind of its geopolitical positioning, posture, influence. And we're seeing that in our sub-region, but maybe in the wider world. And finally, I'll just say something about the ASEAN, being a collection of smaller states and small states. We would like ASEAN to be more, central and consequential in terms of promoting, providing, maintaining stability, prosperity, security in the region, but it's not. It's being divided by China and also by the China-US rivalry and competition and conflict. So we're seeing, China is ahead of, taking a leading role in the global South. The BRICS, the institutions you mentioned earlier, Ambassador Kasit, the ADB, World Bank, a lot of these institutions, international institutions from 80 years ago, being challenged now. And I think the BRICS countries have come to the conclusion that they don't want to be bounded by the old rules anymore, the rules-based so-called liberal international order. So we're seeing a lot of contestation there. For us, I think that the just transition is interesting. That I mentioned at the outset, my remarks that it's going to be longer than we think, longer than we anticipate, and also the priority is just not as high. But what we don't know is how China is going to move ahead. And China has an adaptive capacity. It learns by doing. And, it responds, 3 days ago. But China also is very transactional. So for Africa and Latin America, you want to be multilateral. You want to be regional. You don't want to deal with China bilaterally because that's how they want to do it. So moving forward, I tend to think that the good outcome would be that China would be the provider, it would be the contributor to the green transition, carbon neutrality, and all the goals that we have. But my hunch is that it will be the other way, that this will become the new emerging arena of geo-economic conflict, the green transition.
Thank you, Ajahn Thitinan. Unfortunately, we don't have time for one more question, so it goes to the gentleman.
Thanks very much. I'm Sam Gill. I'm Chief Executive at Dialogue Earth. I wanted to ask a question, make a comment that picks up actually on what Dr. Titinan was just saying, which is that this has been a really fascinating and wonderful panel, and thank you all to the speakers. As we've characterized transitions, I think we've tended through this conversation to default to a particular vision of the green transition, which is a very top-down, state-managed process. It's one that's very intensive in mineral inputs. It's one that doesn't necessarily create jobs or benefits for those countries that have resources that are inputs. And of course, what we're talking about there are not just transitions. We're precisely talking about unjust transitions. And we've rightly focused much of the conversation on how to oppose those unjust transitions, the role of lawyers, the role of activists, civil society, lawmakers, journalists in exposing those unjust transitions. What we've done less of in the conversation maybe is talk about, well, what is the just transition we'd like to see? And the risk, I suppose, is otherwise, when someone as sort of brilliant as Pai is talking about her opposition to hydroelectric projects in the Mekong region, the response is, well, so you want business as usual? You want the unjust, conflict-prone, fossil fuel-intensive, moment that we're in now? And of course, we don't. What we're looking for is something different. And to Dr. Titinan's point, China, I believe, could play a role in that, and it would better serve us if we were able to present what that vision is and think more sort of quite specifically. What I would propose is to look at some of the technological transitions and just transitions that have happened around the world, and as Suri David was saying as well, sort of think about good practice examples. In China, there are examples of decentralized small microgrid PV projects. There are examples of the e-bike transition, for example, that wasn't a big top-down state-managed transition around big national champion companies. It's actually something that really worked for poorer people. There's been a number of technological shifts that have been very demand-led rather than super sort of state-managed and intensive and characterized by massive infrastructure investment. So I suppose my last sort of invitation is, could people say a little bit about the kind of just transition they would seek, the kind of environmental future for the Mekong that they think China could play a positive role in when it comes to trade and investment? Thanks.
Right. Does anyone have a quick note to say on transitions? Can spare 30 seconds.
I think as part of my ESR role, I'm promoting an alternative model of development, and I'm calling it planet-centered participatory model. So that's where the bottom-up approaches of development will become critical, rather than the big projects, small projects, community-driven, and what development means for a particular province and city may be different from what it means for someone else. So that is my vision of just transition. Of course, I did not have time to elaborate, but that's how I see it.
In the Mekong case, it's playing by the rules that others abide by. So they have Lanchang Mekong, right? LMC, but there has already been the MRC and MI and MA, the Mekong regulatory framework. So I think that not coming up with new rules, but maybe adjusting, adapting, playing with the existing rules that others abide by, that I think would be just. I mean, of course, the word just is very loaded. Transition is fine enough, but that would be one example, Mekong region.
Pimpon, would you like to add?
It's the only Chinese on the panel. I said my home country government, I think for the just transition, China should take its own responsibility as it's dominating the renewable energy supply chain, and China benefiting from it, and it also need to take its responsibility. So that is my consideration of what's just the transition, China's role in the just transition globally.
To me, only what I like to add to just transition is inclusion, that we include everyone. We include the rights of river, rights of the planet, rights of the next generation, and rights of those who bear the cost.
I'll just say one thing, taking on from what Dr. Tintinan mentioned about the mechanisms already existing in this region and the lack clearly of consensus in ASEAN. But the only way, and the point I was trying to make earlier was, to push it back on the governments concerned. And they've got to, there's the multilateral groupings like the Mekong region groupings that are around these 5 countries in this region, and as well ASEAN. They've got to make it work, and only then can you really deal with China and collectively demand some increase in standards and action. That's it.
Okay. With that, I would like to thank the panelists for an excellent discussion and, of course, the room for bringing the conversation forward also. I think we can say that we ended up with more questions, more challenges, but at the same time, I think we've landed a parallel to previous dialogues on disaggregating China, the different power dynamics, and what Chinese institutions to approach by the power balance between the dynamics between Southeast Asia and China as comparison to Latin America and previous case studies in Africa as well. So as someone working on disclosures, I'm very for improving the standards in terms of local agency in determining the gains of investments within Southeast Asia. Now, the multi-tier levels that needs to be implemented is definitely going to be something that I hope comes out from the next 2 days workshop. Thank you very much.